If you are buying stocks while a credit card is charging you 22% to breathe, you are not investing. You are decorating a burning house. I have watched people obsess over the next 10 bagger while their balance sheet is quietly running malicious code in the background. They want the thrill of ownership without installing the operating system that makes ownership work. They want the shiny dashboard before they have an engine. They want to talk about index funds, options, crypto, AI, and early retirement. While one flat tire, one emergency room visit, or one layoff would send them begging a bank for permission to survive. That is not a wealth strategy. That is a panic script. Most people do not fail because they never heard of compounding. They fail because they load compounding on top of fragility. They try to build a tower on wet concrete. Then when life leans on it, the whole structure bends and they call the market unfair. The market is not unfair. Your order of operations is broken. The difference between people who eventually own their time and people who spend 30 years feeling behind is often not intelligence. It is sequence. I have spent my life allocating capital. That sounds sophisticated, but at the core it is very simple. Capital goes where the underlying code is strongest. A great business with rotten incentives becomes a bad investment. A decent business with clean economics can become a wonderful compounding machine. Your household works the same way. If your money is flowing through the wrong sequence, every dollar you earn gets less intelligent the moment it arrives. So I want to give you a brutal truth. Your first investment is not a stock. Your first investment is a system correction until you correct the code. Every move after that is contaminated. You can call it discipline if you like. I call it installing the wealth operating system. And the people who never do it spend years confusing motion with progress. The first layer of that operating system is what I would call your shock absorber. Most people think an emergency fund is cash for bad luck. That is too shallow. An emergency fund is emotional armor. It is the thing that keeps a broken transmission from becoming a 22% credit card balance. It is the thing that keeps a market decline from forcing you to sell good assets at bad prices. It is the thing that lets you stay rational while other people are making desperate decisions. If you have no shock absorber, then every surprise in life gets converted into expensive debt, forced liquidation, or panic. That means every future dollar you earn is already under threat before it arrives. People love to skip this because cash feels unproductive. They say cash is not earning enough. They say inflation is eating it. They say they would rather put that money in the market. That is the language of someone who has never understood the price of fragility. Cash sitting there quietly is not laziness. It is refusal power. It means when the car fails, you do not sell your index fund on the worst Tuesday of the quarter. It means when your employer cuts hours, you do not raid a retirement account and pay taxes and penalties just to keep the lights on. It means when life throws a punch, you do not respond by borrowing from your future at the exact moment your future needs protection. The amount is personal, but the principle is not. I would want the first $1,000 fast. Not because 1,000 changes your life, but because it changes your psychology. Then I would push toward 1 month of essential expenses. Then I would keep building toward 3 months. And if my income were unstable, seasonal, commission-based, or freelance, I would lean toward 6. You are not trying to predict every emergency. You are trying to stop small damage from turning into structural damage. That is the first correction, not because it is exciting, because without it, you are not stable enough to own risk. The second layer is what I would call interest fire control. If you are carrying debt at a rate that can outgrow your realistic investment return, you do not have an investing problem. You have a leak with a flamethrower attached to it. A person who carries credit card debt at 22% while celebrating a 9% market return is not winning. He is losing in a more complicated way. People do this because the stock market feels hopeful and debt repayment feels boring. Hope sells. Arithmetic does not. But arithmetic is what decides whether you get free or stay owned. A guaranteed 22% avoided cost is not inferior to an uncertain market gain. In many cases, it is superior, it is clean, it is immediate, it is tax-free in practice because you never hand the money over in the first place. Every dollar used to kill toxic debt is a dollar that stops working against you and begins obeying you. I would write down every debt, every rate, and every minimum payment. Then I would pay the minimums on everything and attack the highest rate first. That is not exciting. It is efficient. The debt avalanche does not care about your ego. It cares about escape velocity, and that word matters. Most people think wealth is built by finding better returns. A great many fortunes are built by removing unnecessary drag. A rocket does not reach orbit because someone painted it a better color. It reaches orbit because the thrust exceeds the pull. High-interest debt is social gravity with a billing department. Until you reduce that pull, you are pretending to ascend while you are still pinned to the ground. Now, here's the part that confuses people. And if you get this wrong, you leave one of the easiest wins in the entire system lying on the floor. There is one exception that deserves to jump the line: employer match. I would call it the free money valve. If your employer matches retirement contributions and you ignore it, you are refusing an immediate return that no ordinary investment can promise. Even if you are paying painful interest rates elsewhere, a dollar that gets doubled or partially doubled on contact is too powerful to dismiss casually. This is where people need adult judgment instead of slogans. You do not dump every spare dollar into the plan and congratulate yourself for being responsible. You contribute enough to capture the full match, because that is the point where the valve is fully open. Then you go right back to extinguishing high-interest debt. Sequence matters. Match first to the limit, then debt slaughter. Then the next layer: if your employer matches 50 cents on the dollar up to 6% of pay, that is not a minor perk. That is a structural gift on a $50,000 salary. A contribution of $3,000 to capture $1,500 is not just saving, it is a pay raise you only receive if you know how the machine works. People miss this because they are distracted by drama. They want a genius move. They overlook the fact that the market offers very few clean gifts. Employer match is one of them. Install that valve properly. Then return to the fire once you have a shock absorber, once the worst debt is being strangled. And once the free money valve is open, you move into a part of the system most people mishandle for decades. I call it the tax shield stack. This is where ordinary savers accidentally become donors. They put money into the most exposed account first because it feels flexible, and they let taxes chew on the compounding year after year. They think they are investing. In reality, they are feeding friction. The government is not confused about the order. The incentives are already on the board. The question is whether you are disciplined enough to use them. At this stage, I want control, low-cost options, and as much shelter from unnecessary tax drag as I can honestly get. That is why the next stop is often the IRA. Why before loading more into the 401k beyond the match? Because many employer plans are mediocre. They offer a cramped menu, higher fees, clumsy administration, and limited flexibility. An IRA usually gives you a wider field, cheaper tools, and more control over how your capital is allocated. Over a few years, that may not sound dramatic. Over decades, fee drag behaves like termites, quiet, relentless, invisible, until you realize something that should have been solid has been hollowed out. This is one of the uglier truths in investing. Most people do not lose only by making spectacular mistakes. Many lose by accepting small. Repeated friction because it looks official. Official does not mean efficient. If I can put money into low-cost broad funds with minimal drag and cleaner choice architecture, I would rather do that than blindly overfeed an expensive plan, simply because an HR portal made it easy. Now the question always arrives: traditional or Roth? Pay taxes now or later. People want a perfect answer, but the future rarely offers one. So I would think about it in terms of position. If your current income places you in a relatively low bracket, Roth can be attractive because you are paying tax while the bill is still tolerable, and future growth can escape untouched. If your current income is heavy and you need relief, now traditional can be sensible because the deduction lowers current strain. If the future is uncertain, split the difference. Tax diversification is not confusion, it is optionality. A bad operating system traps you in one kind of outcome. A good one gives you choices when conditions change. That principle becomes even more powerful when you reach the next tool, which I regard as one of the most underappreciated pieces of the entire machine. Let me make it more concrete. A young worker in his 20s who is in a modest tax bracket and still has decades ahead of him may find Roth money especially attractive because time is the real asset and tax-free growth for 40 years is a formidable thing. A higher earner in peak years may prefer some traditional contributions because current deduction relief matters when the income engine is under the heaviest load. You do not need clairvoyance here. You need enough self-awareness to understand whether present tax relief or future tax freedom is more valuable to your position. When the answer is not obvious, blending both is often wiser than pretending certainty. The same principle applies to contribution room. An IRA may look small to an impatient person. $7,000 or $8,000 if you are older does not look like empire building, but small protected rooms used consistently become strategic rooms. People ruin compounding because they disrespect scale in the early years. They look at annual limits and miss the decades. The machine does not miss the decades. And when people say an HSA is too niche to matter, I know they are still thinking in monthly cash flow instead of lifetime cost structure. Healthcare is not a rounding error in old age. It is one of the great claims against future wealth. A container that can receive contributions, grow with shelter, and later meet that claim on favorable terms is not a side account. It is armor designed for a very predictable war. The HSA, I would call it the triple shield vault. Most people look at a health savings account as a side feature of a high deductible plan that is far too weak in understanding. Used properly, it can become one of the most elegant containers in personal finance. Money goes in with a tax benefit. It compounds without annual tax drag. And if used for qualified medical expenses, it can come out tax-free. 3 shields, that is unusual in life. Major advantages often hide inside boring wrappers. An HSA is one of them. It does not sound glamorous. That is precisely why so many people misuse it. They spend it casually year to year instead of understanding that it can function like a long-range medical war chest. If you can afford to pay current medical costs out of pocket and leave the HSA invested, you are allowing time to do what time always does to well-protected capital. It expands, and later in life, when health costs are no longer hypothetical, that pile can become something close to a pressure release valve on retirement itself. Medical costs are one of the great fear engines of old age. A well-used HSA gives you a pool of capital specifically designed to meet that fear on favorable terms. That is not a cute trick. That is strategic relief. Now we move back to the 401k beyond the match, and this is where the machine begins to look serious. I would call this layer the tax tunnel. By this point, you have handled the obvious chaos. You have absorbed shocks. You have attacked toxic debt. You have opened the free money valve. You have taken advantage of flexible retirement shelter. You have built or begun building the triple shield vault. Now you push deeper into sheltered compounding with larger payroll deductions and let the tax tunnel do its work. Why now? Because now you can afford to think long. Now you are not using retirement accounts as a fantasy costume while your real life is collapsing. Now the money you put away has a better chance of staying away. That matters more than people think. Compounding is not just about rate of return. It is about uninterrupted survival. The account that grows is the account you do not have to rate in a panic. The plan that works is the one you do not sabotage because your structure was weak. When people ask me why some households never seem to get traction, I often think the answer is this: they are trying to compound in public while privately living in disorder. Their visible investments look adult. Their invisible infrastructure is broken. Wealth does not respect performance theater. It responds to sequence. After that comes the phase everyone wants to start with: taxable investing. This is where a lot of people imagine the real game begins. In truth, this is where the real game becomes flexible, and flexibility is valuable, but only after discipline has done its work. I would call the taxable account the freedom bridge. Not because it is superior to the sheltered accounts, but because it connects you to goals those accounts cannot easily serve on demand. Early retirement before penalty-free withdrawal ages, a down payment, an entrepreneurial runway, opportunistic capital family assistance, strategic flexibility. Inheritance planning with stepped-up basis, this is where taxable accounts shine. But if you start here while ignoring the earlier code, you turn the freedom bridge into a toll road you can barely afford. Every dividend gets nibbled. Every realized gain invites a bill. Every impulsive trade adds friction. A taxable account is useful, but it is not innocent. It is a place where the IRS is standing close enough to feel your breath. If you have not exhausted cleaner vehicles first, then you are volunteering for drag before drag is necessary. And this is the pattern that destroys a lot of middle-class ambition. People love visible action. Taxable accounts feel visible. Apps update every second. Charts move. You can tell yourself you are in the arena. But much of that feeling is theater if you have not built the earlier layers. Your taxable account often becomes a hobby dressed up as a strategy. That is why so many people can talk about markets for 10 years and still feel financially fragile. They began with the dashboard. They never fixed the code. Let me make this more uncomfortable, because discomfort is useful when it is accurate. There are really two investors walking around in this country. One investor installs infrastructure first. He creates a buffer. He kills poison debt. He captures structural gifts. He uses tax shelters intelligently. He lets time work in protected environments. Then he uses taxable capital for flexibility and range. That person may not look exciting at first, but over 10, 20, 30 years he becomes difficult to shake. His finances have memory, his capital has direction, his life gains silence. The other investor wants excitement first. He buys stories while paying punitive rates. He neglects cash reserves because they feel slow. He ignores employer match because paperwork annoys him. He funds taxable speculation while tax-advantaged room sits empty. He mistakes access for sophistication. That person may look active, but activity without sequence is often just spinning under brighter lights. Worker versus owner, noise versus silence, consumption of financial content versus control of actual capital. That contrast matters more than your opinion about the next hot stock. When I was younger, I learned that a great many people want the fruit of discipline without the temporary inconvenience of it. They want independence without structure. They want freedom without refusal. They want wealth without saying no to anything that weakens wealth. The market has no obligation to reward that mindset. You have to earn a low cortisol life, and the way you earn it is not by acting rich in fragments. It is by making your money obey a sequence that compounds sanity. So if I were rebuilding from scratch, I would think like this. First, I protect the downside with a shock absorber. Second, I put out interest fire so debt stops eating the future. Third, I open the free money valve and capture the employer match. Fourth, I build the tax shield stack through the accounts that give me control and lower drag. Fifth, I strengthen the triple shield vault if I qualify because healthcare is one of retirement as most predictable threats. Sixth, I push deeper through the tax tunnel and let larger sheltered compounding do its quiet work. Seventh, I use the Freedom Bridge only after the rest of the code is installed. That is not a list for entertainment. That is architecture. And architecture is what separates a financial life that survives from one that scales. A lot of people will resist this because there is very little ego in it. Nobody at a dinner party wants to brag that they increased their emergency fund, captured their employer match, funded an HSA, and avoided stupid taxes. They would rather tell you about a stock that doubled. But one style of behavior creates headlines, the other creates security. I know which one I prefer because there comes a moment in life when the real dividend is not percentage return. It is the ability to sit still, to watch markets fall and not need to touch anything, to lose a job and not lose your mind, to face a medical bill and not finance panic, to decide that a bad boss no longer has veto power over your dignity. That kind of freedom is not built with a single brilliant investment. It is built with clean sequence repeated long enough that your internal world changes. Fear stops driving every decision. Urgency loses its grip. You stop chasing, you start choosing. That is the hidden mechanism most people miss. Good financial order does not merely improve numbers, it alters identity. A person with no buffer, toxic debt, no tax strategy, and no structure is always bargaining with circumstances. A person with reserves, clean sequencing, protected compounding, and flexible capital begins to bargain from strength. That person can wait, that person can refuse, that person does not have to take every deal, every job, every market narrative, every panic sale. That is what wealth is supposed to buy, not applause control. So here is the test. Look at your current money life and ask one hard question. Is your capital running on clean code? Or are you still forcing expensive dollars through a corrupted operating system? Because if the code is corrupted, more income alone will not save you. A bigger paycheck sent through broken sequence simply produces larger waste. More investment ideas will not save you. A better stock tip will not save you. More financial content will not save you. At some point, you have to stop pretending the next clever move will outrun structural stupidity. You have to install the right system. You have to do the boring things in the order that makes the exciting things possible. You have to decide whether you want to look like an investor this year or become one over the next 30. That is the door. Most people will stand near it, talk about it, maybe even make a spreadsheet about it, and then go right back to feeding a machine that taxes their impatience. A smaller number will walk through. They will build the buffer, kill the bad debt, capture the match, use the shelters, protect the compounding. Then build flexibility on top. Years later, the outside world will call them lucky, disciplined, maybe even naturally good with money. They just stopped running corrupted code. And if you are honest, that is the choice in front of you. Now, not stock versus bond, not growth versus value, not bull market versus bear market, code versus corruption, sequence versus self-sabotage, freedom versus a lifetime of preventable financial panic. Choose carefully. the machine will obey whatever you install.